Hello everybody, my name is Jeff and I am here to give tech tips to teachers and administrators about data and being more data driven so that we can be more effective in our classrooms and more effective at driving our student success. In my last video, we looked at downloading a CSV file from Acadience Learning Online and then parsing that data using this great big spreadsheet function that you see on the screen. What I want to do today is take a look at how we can change this long spreadsheet function into something that looks more like this, which is much easier to read, much easier to use, and much easier to share. Let's get started. All right, so we have this spreadsheet that looks like the spreadsheet we worked on in my last video, where we have the school names on the left-hand side, and we have a column for beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year assessments. What I want to show is for each school, how many students were at or above benchmark on Acadience for that benchmark period. And we're going to look particularly at kindergarten students today. So if I go to cell B2 and I paste in that formula that we wrote last time and I copy it down, now I have beginning of year data for schools 1 through 6. And I have the percentage of students who are at or above benchmark in those schools. Now, if I want to do this for middle of year, I can copy this over to the middle of year column, and I can change where it says beginning to middle. I have to change it in 2 places. So there and here. And then I can copy it down as well, and there's my middle of year data. I can do the same thing for end of year, which we haven't actually completed yet, so it would just be blank because I have put in that if error function on this. So that's pretty easy to do. The problem that I've run into is when I'm copying lots of these long formulas and trying to make those little changes in them, I sometimes make mistakes. Because these formulas are long and they're not very human readable, they're hard to make changes without sometimes making mistakes. So we're going to shorten that today. So I am going to go ahead and undo that. And what we're going to look at are things called custom functions. Google allows us to make our own functions that work just like if you do equals and sum and have a function that way. These work just like that, except they're functions that we write ourselves. We're going to look at writing a little bit of code, which sounds scary, but it's not. Google makes it super easy. So what we're going to do first is click on extensions, and we're going to click on AppScript. And this is the code editor where we make this happen. Now, I would suggest that you name this something that you can remember. So we're just going to name it custom functions, if I could type. And we're also going to drag this over and tile it so that we can see both our spreadsheet and our code. All right, so if we're at this point, what I want to do is I want to look at this initial function that it puts in this code editor for us that says, it's called my function. The function says we're going to define this as a function, and then my function is the name of the function. And most code that you write will have what's called a return statement. So we're going to write the word return. And what this says is when this function runs, whatever comes after the word return is what's going to be put in the cell where we put this function. So for now, we're just going to put this is a custom function. And then we're going to put a semicolon at the end. Now, if we come over to our spreadsheet, oh, I better save that. We come over to our spreadsheet here, and we put equal sign and my function with the parentheses and hit enter. It's going to give us this is a custom function. It gives us that return statement, which is exactly what we want. Now, we don't necessarily want a function called my function that just prints text into a cell. We want to do something a lot more creative and a lot more useful than that. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete that out of our cell, and we're going to delete this function, and we're going to create a different function that helps us to filter the data that we have from Acadience in a more useful way. So what we want to do is we are going to create a function called get composite percentage. And we're going to put this in here. And so what this is this says function, which says this is a function, and it's called get composite percentage. And we are going to filter by 4 different variables. And those 4 variables are assessment. So is this a math assessment or a reading assessment? The school name, the grade, and whatever the benchmark window is. So is it beginning, middle, or end? Okay, so that's how we name it, and we say these are the things that we need to know in order to filter our data. And then we're going to put a space and an open squirrely bracket and hit enter so that we have an open squirrely bracket and a closed squirrely bracket, and our things, all of our code is going to go between those. Okay, so that's the first step. And we have this named, and it's all ready to go. If I made a return here and I put that in there, it would return whatever I put in the return statement. But we're not ready for that yet. Now, one thing that you'll notice when you go into a spreadsheet is if you hit equals and you start typing something, you get this cool autocomplete going on in Google. So here, all of the different forms of sum come up. And if I hit enter on one of those, it'll give me even more details. So, but if I type in my custom function, I won't get that, not yet. Here's how you get that. Google provides header material for functions that we can copy into or write into our code editor that will give us that data. So I am going to put that header information in here, and it just goes before the function. And I'm going to explain what each one of these lines does so that we can understand how this works. So here, the forward slash with the 2 asterisks after it says this is a comment. Comments in code aren't executed. They just give the person reading or writing the code information. It's kind of like note taking throughout your code. But this is a special comment because this gives Google Sheets the information that it needs to give that autocomplete. So the first line, so it's an asterisk and a space, and it tells us what the function does. So this function fetches the percentage of students proficient in a particular school, grade, and benchmark window. That's just what it does. Then the next lines tell us what the parameters are that we're asking for. So what are these things that we're going to filter by? And so the first parameters, so asterisk at param, is a string, and we're going to put in reading or math. Which assessment is it? Acadience has 2 assessments. Which one are we looking for? The second parameter is also a string. It's the school name. The third parameter, also a string. We're looking for the grade level. And that could be a number there, but the Acadience Learning Online CSV file puts a K for kindergarten, and that's a string. And the final parameter is which benchmark window are we using, and we could actually put here, if we wanted, beginning, middle, or end, just to make sure that we're really defining our terms there. And finally, we need to put what we're returning, so that's the at return, and we are actually returning the percentage of students that are proficient. Okay, very simple. We get that header information in, and now we can use that autocomplete in our spreadsheet. So now that we have that, we can come over here to school 1. We can hit equals, and we can start typing our function name. So get composite percentage, and you see that it comes up, and it tells us that it fetches the percentage of students proficient in a particular school, grade, and benchmark window, and tells us what it is that we need to enter there in our formula. So it gives us all that autocomplete information. I'm going to put in some information here so that we're ready to go, and then I will just leave this here so that we have a functional function. So the assessment we want is reading. We want it at this school, so it's school 1. And I'm going to put a $sign before the A so that if we copy this, it will continue to be A in that column A. I want the grade to be kindergarten, and I want the window to be beginning. Okay, so we have that in there. It's not going to show anything. There's not even a return statement on our function yet. But you can see if we go over here and type return this, or whatever that is, and we hit save, now we get the word this in there because that's what we're returning. All right. Whenever you are creating a custom function or doing any kind of app script with a spreadsheet, there are 4 variables that you really ought to set up. And a variable in code is just a placeholder for something. Think of it in math. If you do like x plus 3 equals 5, that x is just a placeholder, in this case for the number 2. We do the same thing in code where we say this is something that we're going to reuse over and over and over again, so I want to save it as a reference to something so that I don't have to keep retyping it over and over and over again. So we are going to create 4 variables, and these are variables that literally you should use every time you're writing Google Apps Script in a spreadsheet. Okay, and I'm going to get all of these and I'm going to explain what they are. So these allow us to get data from the spreadsheet. The first one, and the word let here says we're going to define a variable. So you say let space and then whatever the name of the variable is. And you can save all kinds of things as variables. So the first one says we're going to call a variable SS, which is for spreadsheet. And it's going to be the spreadsheet app dot get active spreadsheet. So this is a function that Google has provided for us so that we can get the spreadsheet that's open, or the spreadsheet that this custom function is saved in. It's just going to get that whole spreadsheet so that we can manipulate it. The next one down is we have to get our sheet. And this is our sheet where our data is saved. So in the last video, we saved that in a sheet called data. So if we click on this, we see here is all our data in this one sheet. So we are going to say let sheet equals SS, the spreadsheet that we already defined, dot get sheet by name, and the sheet name that we want is data. Okay. Make sure when you type these out that you type them out exactly how I have them here. The syntax and the capitals, it all matters, as does the semicolon at the end. Okay, the next one is we want to get a range of cells. So a range of cells on that sheet that we just opened. So we say let range equals the sheet that we just opened dot get data range. And what get data range does is it gets every cell on that sheet that has data in it. And it just returns a big blob of cells that we can then manipulate. And the final one is let values, which says from that range, get all of those values. And that basically just gives us rows and columns of all the data in the spreadsheet. So now we have that in a variable called values, and we can take that data and manipulate it the way that we want. Now that we have our data, the next thing that we need to do is get the columns where our data is stored so that we know which column numbers these are. It's the same that we did when we wrote our function where we had to go and say, you know, the benchmark window's in this column, the reading composite score is in this column. We have to do the same thing here. We have to know where our data is stored. And how I would suggest that you do that is to go to the data spreadsheet and find columns that you're looking for. So we obviously need the grade level column. So here, this is column T. Now code works with column numbers, not with column letters. So I want to hit equals here, where it says student grade level, and type in the function column. And what this will do is it will give you the column number that you're actually dealing with. So this is column number 20. Now, one caveat here is JavaScript, which is the code that we're writing, starts counting from 0. So column 1 in the spreadsheet for JavaScript is actually column 0, and so on. So we want to take this number that we get here and subtract 1. So our grade level column is going to be column 19. And we want to go out and get all of the columns on our spreadsheet that do that. Make sure you don't leave that there. You want to have the title there. So I just hit Control Z to undo putting that column formula in there so that I make sure that we keep our data clean. But I have gone through the data spreadsheet and I have gotten all of that data. And now I have column numbers for the school column, which is column 3, grade column, which is column 19, that's the one we just got. Window column is column 20, reading column is column 114, and the math column is column 198. So I just went through and I found all of the columns that I need. The reading column is the reading composite status column, and the math column is the math composite status column, because that's the data that we actually want to look at, right? We want to see how many instances we have in there of at or above benchmark, and we're going to find the percentage of that. So now that we have the columns, we can start to parse the data. Now we're going to start filtering our data. And we're going to filter our data based on the inputs that we took in our function. So we want to know which assessment we have, which school we have, which grade, and which benchmark window. And we're just going to take those one at a time. So for the assessment, there's only 2 possible inputs. It's either reading or it's math. So we're going to do this very simple. We're going to say if the assessment is reading, give us column 114. If it's math, give us column 198. So we can do this very simple. We're going to create a variable called assessment call for assessment column. So let assessment call, and we're going to have it just equal reading call, which we've already set up. We have to set up 1 as a default. But so if it's reading, it's just going to be the reading column. But we're going to say if the assessment, which we brought in here, this is just a variable that we're bringing in. So if assessment equals math, notice the double equal signs, but 1 equal sign is assignment. 2 equal sign says, are these 2 things equal? So if assessment is equal to math, then we're going to do what's in these braces. And what's in those braces is we're going to assign assessment call, which we assigned up here, to the math call instead of to reading call. So that's a really simple way that we can just check, are we working with reading or are we working with math? For the rest of our inputs to filter, it's really easy and we can do it all together. So we can filter by school, grade, and window all at the same time. And we do that using JavaScript's built-in filter function. And this is what that looks like. So we're going to create a new variable called students, and we're going to take values, which is the values from our spreadsheet. We're going to click dot filter, that's the filter function, and a parentheses. And then this right here creates a new variable called row, and that says what that is for every row in the spreadsheet, it's going to return that row back into our data set if it meets these certain categories. So we say take the row, and this arrow here means filter it based off of the values that I put below. So we're going to filter the row by row, bracket, school call, bracket. So that says get row and then that number. So that number is 3, but we're using the variable so that we can reuse our code. So we're going to say row school call. If that is equal to school, which we pulled in from our function, return that row. And so it has to be equal to school, and it has to be row grade call has to be equal to grade, and row window call has to be equal to window. So all 3 of those things have to be true in order for it to return that row. So what this will do is it will just filter through those values and it will give us only the rows that meet those criteria. But it's a very simple filter function that we use in JavaScript. All right, we are almost done. Now that we have our students filtered the way that we want, we have the right assessment, the right school, the right grade, and the right window. All that is left is counting those rows and then filtering out which ones are at or above benchmark, counting those rows, one division problem, and we're ready to roll. First off, I'm going to move this tab over so that my head is not in the way. I'm going to put it on this side. And all right, here are the last few rows of our function. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to say if there are no students that we filtered out. So maybe we haven't done end of year testing yet, but we're asking for end of year data. That's going to just return 0 rows. And so we want to say if students, which is our variable we created here, dot length just counts the number of rows. If that equals 0, instead of giving us an error and saying you can't divide by 0, we want it to return blank. So we just want it to return nothing. So just 2 quotation marks next to each other just says return an empty string. Okay. However, very likely we are going to have data there, so we want to give it the logic here at the bottom. So we are going to create a new variable called @benchmark, and we're going to say for students, we're going to filter that and the row. If the row and assessment column equals @benchmark, I want that data. And these 2 pipe operators here, okay, which is shift / on most keyboards, but the 2 pipes together is OR in JavaScript. So up top on our other filter we did AND, so this is OR. We want to say if it's @benchmark or it's above benchmark, give us that data. So here we have that logic. So we've created that. Now we have those rows that we can count as well, and all that is left is to divide. So we're going to return @benchmark.length, so count these rows, and divide by students.length, so give us those rows of our total number of students. And if we do that, that's going to return our percentage that we want. So all I have to do is save here, and then you can look over to where I have this function, and there's our data. It's the exact same as it was earlier. It's just in a much simpler to read format. So we can copy this down, and that's going to give us for our schools all of our kindergarten data that we want. And we can copy it over here, and all we have to change is this one to middle and copy it down, and this one to end and copy it down. And we obviously don't have end of year data yet, so those are going to be blank because we put in that if statement to say if there's not data, just return an empty string. But hopefully you guys can see the power in that. Now, if I'm just working with a spreadsheet, I will often just write those long form functions like we wrote in the last video. But if I have to share them, it's often easier to give people these really easy to use functions that we've written here. They're less likely to make mistakes, they're easier to copy, and they're way more human readable than the one that we wrote in the last video. Finally, if you have any questions or comments or some things that you'd like to see, please put them in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Thank you.